students. You are here in the third episode of The Lee Show. Learn English enthusiastically, and for tonight, we're going to talk about the standard models of communication and the communication framework. But before that, let us answer a simple activity about what we have discussed in the last episode. In the learning module, you will see that there is this part called What's More, with the instructions that state that let us see how you further understand these variables and elements. Draw a line that matches the words and phrases from column A to column B. An answer is given as example. Now, it depends on you on how you will do it on your paper, but this is how I go with my answer. Please watch. In the left column, you will see all the elements of communication that are provided, and the right column represents all their definitions. So for number 1, the speaker of the message is what we call the sender. Yes, the sender is always the speaker of the message who creates the thoughts and ideas to be sent to the receiver. For number 2, we have the word noise. The meaning of the noise is a barrier. A barrier serves as the hindrance or the walls that prevent an effective communication process. The third one is what we call converting ideas into symbols, which means it is the encoding part. Encoding is the process in which the sender is creating a message from his or her mind, channeling it to the receiver. Number 4, the main idea or information is what we call simply the message. Okay, it's the thought and concepts, messages created by the sender. Number 5, the one who sees or hears the message is what we know as the receiver. The receiver or the listener receives the message coming from the sender. Number 6, it is the environment where communication takes place. The answer is context. Remember that context is actually ambiguous, that it may refer to time, language, and place. Number 7, it is the response or action. Actually, the answer is already given in here, and it is called the feedback. A feedback is also a reply given by the receiver going to the sender. Remember, class, that there is a shift between the roles of the sender and the receiver of the message. The receiver, when he or she creates a feedback or reply, he or she becomes the sender, while the sender becomes the receiver upon receiving the feedback coming from the receiver. The 8th one is what we call the interpretation of the message. The interpretation of the message is what we call the decoding, and it always depends on the receiver on how to understand or comprehend the thought given by the sender. And then the last one, the medium of transmission, where communication message flows, is the last one, the channel. So I hope you understood what we have discussed in the second episode of the show. Now again, let us move on to the third lesson, the standard models of communication and the communication framework. Now let's move on. First, what is a model? A model is widely used to depict any idea, thought, or a concept in a simpler way through diagrams, pictorial representations, etc. Models go a long way in making the understanding of any concept easy and clear. We use communication models to portray visuals and representations in looking into the different communication process and by considering the elements that are part of the various communication processes. And it is easier for us to understand if we see only the picture and not too much focused on words. For this lesson, we're dealing with the 6 types of communication models, and these are Aristotle model of communication, Berlow's model of communication, Shannon-Weaver or linear model, transactional model of communication, SRAM or interactive model, and the last one is the Dance-Helical model. And each of these will be discussed as we go along the session. The first one is what we call Aristotle model of communication. The Aristotle model is depicted as one of the oldest or ancient models of communication, highlighting the special role of the sender or the speaker in delivering the speech or a message to influence the receiver or the audience. According to this model, the speaker plays a key role in communication. He is the one who takes complete charge of the communication. The sender first prepares a content, which he does by carefully putting his thoughts into words with an objective of influencing the listeners or the recipients, who would then respond in the sender's desired way. Since the content of Aristotle model of communication is for a speaker to influence or attract the attention of the audience, it doesn't necessarily mean that the content of the speech must be very, very impressive to the eyes and to the ears of the listeners and viewers. Okay? No points in guessing that the content has to be very impressive, as I've said. The model says that the speaker communicates in such a way that the listeners get influenced and respond accordingly. An example of Aristotle model of communication is when a president of the student organization is pacifying the audience or the receivers to take part of an advocacy in helping or saving and preserving Mother Nature and the environment. There is no time for the receivers to provide feedback. Instead, the sender is doing his best in order for the receivers to be reached and be convinced. As you can see, this is the Aristotle model of communication, starting with the speaker creating a speech, and then there is this occasion as the context of the situation or communication, and then it travels to the audience that is affected by a certain effect. The next one is Berlow's model of communication. Berlow's model of communication takes into account the emotional aspect of the message. Berlow's model of communication operates on an SMCR model. The SMCR model means source, message, channel, and receiver. This is how the Berlow's model of communication looks like. The first one, we have the source. Remember that the part of the source, we should have the features of communication skills, attitudes, knowledge, social system, culture, the same with our receiver because they're both the prime movers of the communication process. And then the main idea is what we call the message, consisting of the elements, structure, content, treatment, and code. And the message will undergo what we call the channel through what ways? We have seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting. The Berlow's model of communication also highlights the consideration of emotions and feelings being exchanged by the source and the receiver. The third one is the linear model of communication. We also call it the Shannon-Weaver. The linear model was proposed by Shannon and Weaver in 1949. This model of communication is divided into three parts. The first part of the model is the center, and this is the person who is speaking. The second part of the model is the channel, which is the apparatus for carrying the message like the use of a phone or a radio. The third part of the model is the receiver, and this is the person who picks up the message. In short, there may only have 3 to 5 elements of communication that are part of the Shannon-Weaver or linear model. The message is created by the transmitter going into the channel, and then the final touch is the receiver. The reason why the Shannon-Weaver is called a linear model of communication is because it is just a one-way process, and it does not necessarily need a feedback or a reply in return. An example is when a newscaster is delivering news updates or information to the audiences on TV. It does not have reply or feedback, where the newscaster is only the one talking and delivering an information. The fourth one is the transactional model. This transactional model was proposed by Barnland in 2008. In the transactional model, communication is seen as an ongoing circular process. We are constantly affected and are affected by those we communicate with. But remember, class, it is not always expected that the flow of communication in the transactional model is quick and fast. Because when you use mobile phones or even email, you have to wait for the response of the receiver. Figure 1.2 shows the transactional model of communication. And now if you will see, we have the elements of communicator as the sender, creating the message, going through a channel, and then down to the receiver. The receiver has a type of worldview or larger opinion that may affect the interpretation of the message. And then, if he or she is ready, the receiver will create a feedback that depends on the context down to the sender. All the messages are affected by the noise or the barriers. The fifth one is SCRAM or SHRAM, the interactive model. This model was developed by Wilbur Schramm in 1954. It deals with exchange of ideas and messages taking place both ways from sender to receiver and vice versa. Imagine that SHRAM or the interactive model is the opposite of the transactional model, wherein we find it so quick to exchange information here in this model. In interactive model, whenever a source sends a message to a receiver, he encodes the message first. The encoded message is then received by the receiver where it is decoded to get the original information. Again, the receiver acts as a source, encodes another message, also known as a feedback, and sends it back to the sender. The interactive model is the most specific model where we can see and understand the shift or exchange of roles between the sender and the receiver. An example of the SHRAM or interactive model is when you are brainstorming with your classmates, friends, teachers, or peers. The last model is no other than the dance helical model. PAC. The helical model of communication was proposed by Frank Dance in 1967 to throw some more light on communication process. Dance thought of communication process similar to helix or like a spring going downwards or upwards.
Sabay-sabay!
Spaghetti
What do we really mean by a helix? A helix is nothing but a smooth curve just like a spring, as I told you earlier. Which it goes upwards also comes downwards. The helical model of communication was designed by Frank Dance, keeping the simple helix in mind. The Dance helical model represents the progress, development, and experiences of both the sender and the speaker in nominating the topics to be discussed or talked about while they are in the circle. For instance, a certain group is talking about a science project that they have to accomplish, and then later on in the conversation, they were able to also bring out and talk about all the other projects and assignments that they have to accomplish in different subject areas. Until then, they uncover about the topic of their professors or teachers and going into different topics, and that is what we call the Dance helical model. To recap, the 6 models of communication are the Aristotle model, the Berlus model, the linear or Shannon-Weaver model, the transactional model, the interactive or SHRAM model, and the Dance helical model of communication. Now, let us move on to the communication framework. Communication models were developed following these 5 frameworks and viewpoints. First is mechanistic. The mechanistic framework simply means that the communication process is developed by the first and second parties. The first party serves as the sender and the second party serves as the receiver. The next one is the psychological framework. The psychological viewpoint shows us how both communicators exchange or conveys their emotions, feelings, behaviors, and attitudes to each other. However, the emotions and feelings may actually affect the encoding and decoding of the message. The third is that we have the social framework, or the social viewpoint considers communication as a result of social interaction between the sender and the receiver. It is high level of communication wherein the messages are particular to the beliefs, culture, attitudes, and languages of both parties. This framework says that communication is directly dependent on the content of speech. How one communicates is the basis of the social viewpoint. So better think of your strategies on how you will deliver your messages clearly and which will actually lead us away from the miscommunication and misunderstanding. It is how we become friendly and how we establish connections, rapport, and relationships with other people. The systemic framework is dependent on the interpretation of the receiver based on how he or she understands, comprehends, or creates conclusions from the message he received from the sender. When the sender becomes the receiver, he does exactly what the receiver did before. The last one is what we call critical framework. The critical viewpoint says that communication is simply a way with the help of which an individual expresses his power and authority among other individuals. Take note that the critical framework doesn't always mean being superior over the other people. It may also possess what we call constructive criticism that may help us progress or develop our certain facets to be effective communicators. Again, the 5 communication frameworks are mechanistic, psychological, social, systemic, and critical. Grade 11 students, that is for our lesson and episode 3 here in the Lee Show. Learn English enthusiastically. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact or communicate with your respective subject teachers. And we want to really communicate well with you and to reach you out in any time or in any way possible. It's already 11 in the evening, and I don't want you to miss the next episode to be watched for tomorrow. And I hope you recognize and appreciate my effort in doing this. Thank you so much, guys, and do not forget to join the Lee Show Learn English Enthusiastically Facebook group, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, PJ Tenterly. Thank you so much, and my name is PJ Tenterly or PJ Santos, and this is the Lee Show Learn English Enthusiastically. Students and my co-teachers, good night. Bye!